As the women-led protests in Iran continue, the crackdown is growing increasingly violent. Hundreds have been killed since September, but the world is not letting their fight fade out of the news. Our next guest is one of the world's leading figures engaged in the fight for Iranian women's rights. Azar Nafisi's journey began when she was expelled from the University of Tehran in 1981 for refusing to wear a veil. Now she's a best-selling author of Reading Lolita in Tehran, among other books, and we are so pleased to have her join us today on France 24. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You have been at this fight, at the forefront of this fight for decades, so you have a unique perspective when it comes to these current protests. I'm interested in just what was your initial reaction when you heard about the death of Mahsa Amini and the resulting protests?
Well, I had two contradictory feelings and emotions. On one hand, it was a continuation of my outrage and grief at the kind of violence that this regime is capable of, and just killing innocent people. That was one reaction. And the other reaction was joy. It was hope. Because this uprising in Iran right now is a turning point in the history of Iranian people and especially Iranian women's movement.
Why do you believe that it's a turning point?
Well, there are about 3 or 4 reasons for that. One is that this uprising is very new. I mean, there are so many features of it that had not happened, not just in Iran, but in the world. But there is one consistency to it, and that it is a continuation of the fight that these young people's mothers and grandmothers have been fighting for. At the time of revolution, women had all sorts of rights, including having a minister for women's affairs. Next to France, it was the second woman to be elected. The second thing about it is that Iranian people have lost their faith in the reform movement. Before, they kept thinking that maybe things can change through reform, and now they believe that reform for this regime is a revolution. And the Iranian women have lost their fear. They know about their power. I mean, just think how powerful you are. If you go into the streets of Tehran without the mandatory hijab, it means that the regime has changed. And the last thing is that the regime itself is afraid. This violence is not because of its strength. It is because of its failure and of its weakness. And that is why they're going so crazy, because they don't know how else to react to what is happening.
Mm-hmm. But the reality of the crackdown and the reaction by the regime is that you have women and men being jailed, beaten, hundreds losing their lives. I mean, what is your message to these women?
My message is that they are carrying a fight that started over a century ago, and they are giving birth to a new Iran because women's rights is human rights. And it is not just the women. You have minorities, for example, the Kurdish and the Baluchi minorities. You have the Baha'i religious minority that are being repressed. And as a woman who has been waiting for this moment, I want to thank them for bringing this moment. And I hope that we who are outside Iran can be a worthy voice for those who are inside.
You self-exiled to the United States. You now live in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very political town. I'm wondering, though, what kind of misconceptions you hear about Iranian women when you discuss this movement and these protests with Westerners.
You know, a lot of times it's just incredulity. People don't believe that every single day these women are going into the streets knowing that they might be killed. I keep telling people in Washington and in America what actually President Macron told the Iranian human rights activists. He told them, your cause is our cause. And that is the message to the Western democracies, that democracy in Iran or democracy in Ukraine will bring democracy, will promote democracy in France or in the United States. So that's my message, that they should go behind the movement because it is to their advantage. It is not just being nice to Iranian people, but being pragmatic, in fact, in supporting the movement.
What are your connections now with women who are living in Iran? Are you speaking with young women there regularly?
Yeah, some of my very close friends are there, and they are active. And actually, one of my students from Reading Lolita, she's also quite active, and I connect to them when I can through WhatsApp mainly, and they give the news. There is so much expectation and vibrancy, in what they say. But of course, they're also anxious.
When is the last time that you were able to visit Iran? And what would it need to look like? What would need to happen for you to return there? Would you want to?
What was the last time that I...
When was the last time, right, that you visited Iran?
I lived in Iran.
Or that you've been there?
Yeah. The last time I was in Iran was in '97. The last time I connected to Iran was about 10 days ago, actually. But what happens is that my friends keep sending messages. And so, like this morning when I woke up, there were messages about telling people what to do when they come out into the streets.
Would you consider, as a woman and all of the work that you've done, you've said that this is your life's mission to push women's rights in Iran. Would you return to live there?
I would love to return. In one sense, I mentioned in my book that I left Iran, but Iran never left me. So even when I was here, my heart was always with Iran and the Iranian people. So I hope I will see the mountains of Tehran again.
And maybe to wrap up, you could just tell us a little bit, for viewers who are not familiar with your most famous work, Reading Lolita in Tehran, just a little bit about what your book examines.
About Reading Lolita in Tehran? Well, when I discovered that it is becoming impossible for me to teach or write inside Iran, I created this group of females who were my students beforehand. And, we didn't know that we were doing anything subversive, but just reading the books and discussing them and writing about ourselves. One of the important things about that class was that we could freely talk about ourselves, something that we could not do at the university. And it was subversive because reading is search for truth. Writing is a search for truth. You yourself in the media, you're constantly looking at the facts. And these are so dangerous to a totalitarian regime because, as you know, totalitarian mindsets, even in America, they live on lies. They live on creating illusions that are not true. And so that class became subversive in itself because we as women became ourselves, not the figment of an Ayatollah's imagination, the way we were in public in Iran.
Azar Nafisi, it's been wonderful speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us. And to our viewers, a note to our viewers, if you're here in Paris, Azar will be speaking tomorrow, Saturday, December 3rd, at the MK2 Institute, if you'd like to hear more from her.
Thank you so much.